He only wanted to shop in peace. No loud scene, no commotion, just a man moving quietly through the aisles. But the store clerk's eyes followed his every step, suspicion dripping from every glance, as if simply existing in that space made him guilty. What the clerk didn't know was that this shopper wasn't who they thought he was, and when the truth came to light, it would flip the balance of power in a way no one expected. So the question is, who really had the right to be watching whom? To most people, Daniel Carter was just another face blending into the crowd. He dressed simply, carried himself quietly, and never made a show of his success. Few knew that he was the driving force behind a string of thriving businesses, a man who had built his empire through years of persistence and grit. On this day, though, he wasn't at a boardroom table or in a high-rise office. He was doing something ordinary, stopping by a store in one of the malls he owned, looking for a simple gift. For Daniel, moments like these were rare, even refreshing. No titles, no attention, just a chance to be another shopper moving from aisle to aisle. But beneath the calm routine, attention always lingered. Experience had taught him that no matter his wealth or accomplishments, the color of his skin often spoke louder to strangers than his achievements ever could. As he browsed, that familiar unease returned. He could feel the air shift, sense the gaze that lingered a little too long. Something as ordinary as picking up a box from the shelf was suddenly loaded with unspoken judgment. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet it felt as though he'd already been put on trial. What Daniel didn't know was that this shopping trip was about to test not just his patience, but his very dignity. And by the time the truth surfaced, it wouldn't be him under the microscope. It would be the system that allowed suspicion to replace respect. Daniel moved from aisle to aisle, scanning shelves with the kind of ease that came with years of shopping unnoticed. But today was different. Every time he paused, he felt the shadow of someone just a few steps away. The store clerk, a young man in a pressed uniform, kept circling back, pretending to straighten items, adjusting displays that didn't need fixing. His eyes never really left Daniel. At first, Daniel brushed it off. He had dealt with this before, those silent accusations that followed him in stores, restaurants, even hotels. But as the minutes ticked by, the scrutiny grew bolder. When Daniel picked up a small item, the clerk leaned closer, pretending to check tags. When Daniel set it down, the clerk scribbled something on a pad. What should have been an ordinary shopping trip began to feel like an interrogation without words. Other customers passed freely, their bags filling without suspicion. Yet Daniel's every movement was tracked, as though his presence itself was a crime. The humiliation burned quietly beneath his calm expression. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but he also knew that in moments like this, innocence rarely mattered. The tension escalated when the clerk whispered into a walkie-talkie. Daniel caught the faint crackle of static, the low response from someone unseen. His chest tightened. Was security already watching? Were they waiting for him to make a wrong move? He could almost picture the headlines, the cameras, the spectacle of being paraded out in handcuffs from a mall that was, ironically, his own. The unfairness cut deep. He had poured years of work into this very building, into creating jobs, opportunities, and a space meant to serve the community. Yet here he was, treated like an intruder in a place he owned. And the irony was cruel. The clerk who followed him so intently had no idea the man under suspicion signed his paycheck. Daniel slowed his steps, heart pounding but face steady, weighing his options. If he spoke up too soon, he risked being dismissed, or worse, escalated against. If he stayed silent, the humiliation might grow into something even more dangerous. The walls of the store felt closer now, the air thicker. And then, just as the clerk moved toward him with a manager in tow, Daniel realized this confrontation was no longer avoidable. Something was about to break wide open. The manager approached with stiff authority, the clerk close behind, Their eyes locked on Daniel as though they had caught him mid-crime. The whispers grew louder, other shoppers pausing, curious to see what trouble had unfolded. Daniel felt the weight of every gaze pressing down on him, branding him guilty before a word was spoken. "Sir, we've had reports of suspicious behavior," the manager said coldly, already gesturing toward the security guard now closing in. Suspicious. The word echoed like a verdict. Daniel's pulse hammered. He hadn't stolen, hadn't caused a scene. Yet in their eyes, his presence alone was offense enough. He stood still, letting the silence stretch, watching the clerk's smug expression tighten with expectation. They thought they had cornered him, reduced him to a man stripped of dignity, forced to prove he belonged. But Daniel wasn't just a shopper. He was the owner of the very ground beneath their feet. With measured calm, he reached into his pocket, not for a wallet, but for the sleek card embossed with the mall's corporate seal. Gasps rippled as he held it up. "Suspicious," he said quietly, steady as stone. "I own this building." The room froze. The manager's face drained of color, the clerk's smirk collapsed, and the security guard hesitated mid-step. Shoppers who moments ago stared with doubt now shifted uncomfortably, realizing the spectacle they'd been complicit in. The power dynamic flipped in an instant. What was meant to humiliate Daniel had instead exposed something larger: how quickly bias could strip a man of respect, no matter his achievements. The silence that followed wasn't relief, it was revelation. Because now everyone in that store had to confront the same question. If this could happen to the man who owned the mall, what chance did anyone else have? The silence in that store didn't erase what had already happened. "Yes?" The manager stammered apologies, the clerk avoided eye contact, and the guard quickly retreated. But the damage was done. Daniel had walked in as a man simply trying to shop, and instead was treated like a threat in a space he owned. The power of his revelation stopped the humiliation in its tracks, but it couldn't undo the sting of what led to it. For Daniel, the moment was less about pride and more about pain. If ownership, success, and respectability couldn't shield him from suspicion, then what hope was left for those with less power, fewer resources, and no platform to fight back? The incident became a mirror of a deeper reality, one where black men and women are too often judged first by their skin, and only later, if ever, by their humanity. Word spread quickly through the community, and the story was retold again and again. Not as a tale of wealth or victory, but as a reminder of how fragile dignity becomes when prejudice is allowed to roam unchecked. Daniel chose not to fire the clerk or close the store that day. Instead, he demanded new training, new policies, and a public acknowledgement of what had taken place. Because change, he knew, didn't come from silence. It came from forcing uncomfortable truths into the open. And that's the lasting weight of his story, that respect should never be conditional, and humanity should never have to be proven. But the question remains: how many more times will it take for the world to see what should be clear? That equality isn't a privilege to be earned, but a right that should never be questioned. Would you like me to now stitch the entire script together into a polished 8-12-minute narrative so it flows seamlessly from hook to resolution?